Hi, everybody. I'm back again. And so, hope everybody get yourself some coffee, get yourself some tea, something, get comfortable because my name is Beth Wagner. I am reading my dad's manuscripts. I'm marking them up for editing. And tonight I have 5 chapters. Now, I say that, however, it's not that long. The very final chapter, spoiler, has only like 2 pages, and it's really more of a epilogue. But I have to getting through all this, and I've read more than this in one night, not a problem. So, but there's 5 chapters here. So, without further ado, I am going to skip my normal preamble, and I'm going to just get right into it, even though I normally ramble quite a bit. So, here we go. The name of the story is The Dance of 100,000 Steps. If you are just tuning in, unfortunately, please go to the beginning. Please watch past broadcasts because, oh boy, this is the last part of the book. So you'll have missed everything. Anyway, without further ado, let us dive in. Chapter 14. At the tail end of the round of balls and parties held to celebrate the ascendance of King Balad IV to the throne, came the wedding of the Baron Cadiflon and Lady Caelis Nfeo. 2 days before the grand affair, the Lady Caelis Nfeo managed to corner the Baron Cadiflon. "Now, Jerry," she said, a determined expression on her face, "I want to know who you are. What were you doing that brought you out of France so precipitately? Precipitately? What? What word is that? Okay, hold on. I have so many questions, and this is perfect. Irene? No, not this time. Irene and Celine were fighting. Sorry.
No.
Okay.
Sitting down there, and Celine was up there.
I'm letting you know. I know you didn't. Don't. It's not her. She's innocent. She's an innocent cat. This one time, she's an innocent cat. Sorry, guys. Cat drama. Anyway, let's start that again, shall we? Although I'm still having to write up the fact that I'm just like, this feels really, really jostly. Okay. At the tail end of the round of balls and parties held to celebrate the ascendance of King Balad IV to the throne, came the wedding of the Baron Cadiflon and Lady Caelis Nfeo. Two days before that grand affair, the Lady Caelis Nfeo managed to corner the Baron Cadiflon. "Now, Jerry," she said with a determined look on her face, I want to know who you are. What were you doing that brought you out of France so precipitately? Lying was not going to be an option. I would have to tell the truth. Though perhaps not all the truth. Yes, we want to know the truth. You have 3 chapters left basically 4 chapters left to tell us the truth. Tell us the truth. Sorry. That is a B. She's not saying that. I was a spy for Brigantia, and I was leaving France in a hurry because my own people had betrayed me. She frowned. Your own people betrayed you? Why would they do that? It seems odd in light of the ability that I've seen you display. I spread my hands. I don't know for certain. All I can do is make a few guesses. She wasn't about to let me go. Tell me your first guess, at the least. The king of Brigantia was afraid of me. Hold on. Sorry, I have to write down, like, anyway. The king of Brigantia was afraid of me, especially when he went into his episodes of madness. He gave the order to get rid of me. And before anyone realized his state of mind, the order had been passed on. King of Brigantia fears a spy? You're more than just a ferreter's secrets, then? I try to smile. That's the difficulty about arguing with academics. They hear things in your words that you never said. She put her what? Oh, I misread that. She put her fists on her hips. I thought she put her fists on her lips, which never mind. And you're trying to evade the issue? What were you what were you that the king of Brigantia, half mad or not, was afraid of you? I sighed. On occasion, I was an assassin. The king and his mad phases sometimes feared I might assassinate him. The gods alone know why he thought that. You were an assassin, but no longer? Since I came to Afresh, I have done no political killings except for the ones I did on our late escapade. I suppose I shouldn't have expected any common reaction from Callie. She was not an ordinary person. Instead of being horrified, perhaps extracting a promise that I wouldn't assassinate anyone else, she acted as if this was all past and the future would take care of itself. Oh boy. The wedding was quite the affair, and as befit an upper class alliance. Callie and I stood before the altar of the God who rules the world to give and receive oaths. All her nearest relatives were in France, and her father was dead long before the uprising. So Uncle Valt asked the benediction of the God on us and on our union. The wedding feast and ball were held in Valt's home. The ball decorated with the conventional gold rings and wheat sheaves. The ladies were all in fine and colorful gowns, the men in fine and stylish suits. There was the usual young woman, always young, who was discussed behind hands and fans. Poor thing, you'd think she went out of her way to look bad. She had to know half the trimmings were green and gold, yet she wore that. I imagine there were also discussions about Callie throwing herself away on a commoner from Brigantia. These discussions would be complete with accounts of rumors about the bridegroom having an influential post with Lord Cad Tarnhend, and of course he did. And of course he did. Callie always had been able to twist her uncle around her finger. Perhaps someone even made note of the fact the bridegroom must have some redeeming qualities since he was raised to the nobility by the king, and even given the further award of a barony by the same king. No matter how influential Tarnhand is, everyone knew it was difficult to convince the king to make such awards if there was not a good reason. Such things never said in the actual hearing of either Callie or myself. Were never said in the actual hearing of Callie or myself. We were both able to go through the day without a great deal of apprehension for what we had brought on ourselves. "Va," she said. "I thought picking her way out of the ruins of Walkren was wearing. I think after today I could sleep for 2 whole days." "Go ahead," I said. "I don't even think I have to keep watch this time." She turned and grasped him by the shoulders. "Oh, no, you don't, Jordan Wesson. I've had to put this night off for too long as it is." She slipped her arms up around my neck. She was near enough my weight that she didn't have to pull my face down very far. She was near enough my height that she didn't have to pull my face down very far for a kiss. She didn't have to pull very hard either. It did feel very good the next morning not to have to scramble into clothing to make an escape. My work with Walt had been changing more and more from an occasional thing. It seemed he called me to his house almost every other day to give advice. I would have preferred to quietly run my company, but I did feel some duty to the country. I did manage to come in. I did manage to come in into Stanrad's from time to time, 1 or 2 days a week, to see how it was coming along, and perhaps give advice or help where they were needed. Contar, Contar Stanrad was well able to run the company by himself, though, so as long as he didn't have to deal with some ruthless and high-placed lord trying to ruin him. Shortly after the wedding, on one of my days in the office, Alfcron appeared at the door of the office smiling. If the impoverished Baron Cad Dyflin were to deign to buy a glass of wine for an impunctuous? Sure. Impunctuous. Nope, I don't know. One of those things I can read, but I can't or write. I'm sorry. Okay. Do. Let's start that sentence again. And I don't know about this word, so I'll just go over it. The impoverished Baron Cad Dyflin were to deign to buy a glass of wine for an impetuous student, he might learn something of importance. Knowing Alfcron as I did, I was sure he was not going to tell me what that Fragrant was desirous of getting revenge on us for the futile war, or anything of that sort. I stood. Very well, a glass of wine would be a fine thing about now. They taught us simple spell detection and tracing recently, Alfcron said. I'd thought I knew a fair bit about the subject, but apparently what I'd known was a mere drop of water in the ocean of what was to be learned. And of course, we learned by using examples in the class. But I wish to try a more practical application, asking a fellow student to cast a simple spell on me and seeing whether or not I could detect it and track it seemed equally artificial. Knowing that my friend and previous employer might well attract various spells, I used you as a subject. Sure enough, there were various spells being aimed at you. You are warded, and very capably so, by the Lady Kalis in Vale. That is, Lady Cad Dyflin now. And congratulations, by the way. I took care not to disturb those wards, not in the slightest, but I did track one of the strongest spells, a scrying spell. and discovered it was coming from the Burgundian embassy. There might be a number of reasons for their interest in you, and I'm not asking those reasons, merely informing you of the spell. Thank you for the warning. It's good to know that. He nodded, then grinned. I'd warn you that the mood among students is frenzied, but the mood among students is always is. I smiled at that. Even so, it's not a good sign. Too much disaffection in any sector is bad for the country. How much is too much? I suppose you're quite familiar with the mood in the city? Yes. I'd say they're still sullen. The new king doesn't seem to have much more concern for the ordinary people than the old king did. Another insurrection? No, not right away. I suspect the next one will be more than just an exemplary affair. Next time around, there'll be plans and stocks of arms and careful consideration as to who gets to know what about the whole matter. I carefully avoided looking around to make sure that no one are alone. That's one way to make sure that people think you're doing something suspicious. Besides, I was always well aware of who was how close to me. To change the subject, did you hear that Lord Hargal Cad Aladost has been released from prison on the condition that he retire and live quietly on his estates unless recalled to the capital? I had nothing to do with that one, by the way. They're fairly sure he had nothing to do with the insurrection. Even fairly sure that the business of the printing press was arranged by some rival. But they don't want to take a chance. A lovely thought. I hope he enjoys himself there. Indeed. Would you care for another glass of wine before I go back to work? Thank you. I will. I reported to Velt on the Burgundian embassy's interest in me. It shouldn't surprise a man with a Burgundian name, suddenly ennobled in Approche, working for and with the influential Approche aristocrat, working for and with an influential Approche aristocrat, would attract attention in all the rank-conscious nations. It's too late to wish I had changed my name. Might they also take specific action? I wasn't sure how much of Valt's concern was for an action against the nation and how much was a concern for the action taken against his niece's husband. It's futile to hope they won't eventually connect Jared and Wesson with the new Baron Cad Dyflin, and with Jared Wesson, the late Burgundian spy and assassin. It's even more futile to hope they wouldn't try to do something about me. Maybe the passing on of a foolish orator had driven me away, but I don't think anyone's going to accept that I'd let bygones be bygones. And show up to the embassy making declarations and oaths before that I have nothing against them? Foolishness! Valt frowned. So perhaps we're not on a war footing, but we should be ready for their next step? I shrugged. I'm afraid that's about the state of things. I'm sorry to have brought trouble to your house, Valt. He waved that away. The only trouble will start is if they start it. You've done nothing against Burgundian interests, so they have no cause for concern. I appreciate your support, Valt. I walked down and quietly opened the door of Callie's workshop. The light was dim in there, though much better over her workbench where she sat, hunched over a book, with a sheet of paper, half filled with calculations beside her elbow. There were 2 stacks of books in front of her, one containing 3 volumes, the other containing 4, of which each of which had several cloth bookmarks of various colors in it. As I approached, she muttered something and seized one of the middle books in the stack of 4, opened it up to one of the marked places, and muttered something that sounded like a word upper class approach ladies weren't supposed to use. She closed the book firmly, and it seemed she was refraining from slamming it shut. Isn't it about time to stop for the night and come to bed? She gave a start and turned to me with a smile, though I could tell the smile was at least a little forced. Hello, Jerry. Yes, you're right. I should go to sleep. You go on. I'll be along in a moment. What are you working on anyway? She was evasive. I don't want to talk about it until I'm sure I can make it work. Theory says I should be able to make it work, but efficiently, no, I'm not going to talk about it yet. I promise so. When I got it working or I proved that it can't work, I'll tell you. A good spy was to know when not to press an issue. So does a good husband. I was at least a good spy. I went on to bed. She was not there in a moment, nor even 2 or 3. I was almost asleep when she came, and she was in worse shape than that. We played this scene in variations 4 or 5 nights a week. If it weren't for the mornings, I would worry. Fellow lurking at the corner, sir. Been there off and on for the last 4 days. Thank you, Charrot. Perhaps I'd better go deal with him. The person in question was well dressed, gray coat, blue trousers. Well dressed, but not flashy. Various things about his stance, his manner, and his movements told me he was most likely a paid duelist. I'd heard it said that the code duello makes for a polite society, where a man is likely to have to pay for his offenses with his blood. What it makes for is legalized murder, where a man skilled with a sword can legitimately kill someone who offends him, thus forcing his forcing his way on. Forcing his way on anyone less skilled than he. Sorry, I'm just having a heck of a time tonight. An obvious extension to this is the paid duelist, a man of sufficient aristocratic lineage that he can indeed challenge another noble. This man, for some sufficient payment, will pick a fight with and kill a particular person whom the hirer, for one reason or other, does not wish to face. It isn't so simple as, here's a bag of Mazers, go kill Lord X. More likely a gift or two, and then a hint that someone really ought to deal with Lord X. I also knew there were a large number of people who paid to see me dead. The mere fact of my being a Burgundian commoner, raised to the Apresh nobility, offended many. It was a further offense that I was promoted into a barony of some prestige almost at once, it might seem. Someone somewhere must have decided I had lived long enough. Depending on how determined I was to do so, I could have avoided the fellow for a longer or shorter time. The other face of the coin was to make an example that would speak very loudly to anyone else thinking of hiring themselves for the task. When I went out, therefore, I went in the direction of the gray-coated fellow. He began to walk toward me. The most likely scenario was that he would allow our shoulders to brush, then accuse me of jostling him, and demand satisfaction. As he moved toward me, at the last moment, our shoulders would touch. So that our shoulders would touch, I moved also. I stepped in toward him, planting my feet and turning my shoulder so that it took him full in the chest. He staggered forward and attempted to keep his balance, then fell on the backside of his trousers in the none too clean street. I might have stepped forward, helping him to his feet and begging his pardon, but I'd already decided against that. Keeping my face blank, I waited as he sprang to his feet. But my stimulated anger was all too real now. You clumsy base-born oaf! I'll have your blood for that! Oh dear, I said mockingly. He's angry. I drew my sword. Actually, the code usually called for choosing of seconds. Attempts to reach reconciliation or conciliation. I don't know. That looks weird. And finally, a meeting at an arranged time. It was not unknown, though, for two hot-blooded young fools to draw swords and have at it in the public street. However angry he'd been, as soon as his sword was in his hand, he suddenly became cool. Oh, old Holton would like this fellow. With someone like this, I wasn't going to try any flashy swordsmanship, playing with him for a while before disposing of him. Much too dangerous, Jerry. We tested each other with a couple of feints before we really went at it. He was as dangerous as I had expected, fast and meticulous. Our swords rang and screeched together as each of us sought an opening. At last I managed a parry and a riposte that took him in the throat. Even so, I had to spring back fast from one last vicious lunge as he went down. By this time, the constabulary had arrived, 3 men, all overweight and unshaven, demanding to know what was happening here. This fellow challenged me. We fought. He lost. The constabulary knew me by sight, of course, so there was no possibility of an arrest or for murder. One of the perks of the aristocratic system, the system I was in the habit of sneering at. Perhaps I was a hypocrite, but I took full advantage so as not to have to resort to any of the stratagems I would have had to use if the situation had come up when I was a mere spy. The senior of them frowned at the dead man in the street, though. These sort of things shouldn't happen in the streets. There ought to be an investigation. I took the hint and reached for my wallet. Sorry to have troubled you, gentlemen. Suppose I give you 6 mazers for the inconvenience and assure you of my cooperation in any investigation. A message sent to my company here will always reach me, though it may not have to be passed on from here. The senior man touched his hat. Thank you very much, sir. I'm sure there will be no need to bother you more. We'll call for the cart to have this fellow taken away. When his relatives come to claim him for burial, we'll report the facts to them. No, I did not care for when others... No, I didn't care for when others took advantage of their rank. Yeah, took advantage. But the way of the world was not easily changed. The situation in France, for example, was partly to do with remedying inequalities. What sort of aristocracies were being... Nope. Oh, so what sort of atrocities were being committed there, though in the name of remedial justice? Tip, guys, there's a difference between aristocracy and atrocity, although sometimes they are connected. They are 2 different words. Okay. The trouble is, young Jerry, said Balt, that there are too many possibilities. How many people in Hralstordren want to see you dead? Roughly 3/4 of the noble class are offended by your sudden rise. A quarter of these, depending on the day of the week, might be sufficiently offended to do more than wish you dead. And hiring a paid duelist to kill you, that is something only a noble would think of. If I had access to the body for a little while, Callie said, I might well be able to track who'd hired him. Walt shook his head doubtfully. It's not illegal to hire a duelist, just bad form. And I understand that most of these fellows carry some sort of charm to foil such tracking. Callie's eyes narrowed. I'd wager I could break through the effects of any such charm. And if you did, what then? I said. So we find the one who did the hiring and possibly make his actions public? What does that achieve? Save to make that person the angrier. And also bring me to the attention of some others who might not have otherwise cared. People have made up their minds as to hate me would just take such a public statement as a reason to hate me more. I know it's not logical. I'm the one who was attacked, but logic doesn't move people as much as passion does. You had to give them credit. Both Valt and Callie understood immediately. But Callie wasn't entirely satisfied. So what's left for us to do? Be patient as you fight packs of wild duelists? Of paid duelists? Actually, that sort don't like taking chances. Shortly, most of them will know just how good I am and won't face me for any money. I might still have to fight one or two more, but that's likely to be the extent of it. And if either of those two happen to be a bit better than you, Callie demanded. I grinned at her. Then I'll cheat. I have no desire to die right away either. Oh, don't be so cheerful about it. This is serious. I know. Old Holton would have words to say about fighting a regular duel with all the rules and foolishness. Kick him in the shin and run him through quick before he's finished flinching. The point is, you live. She still wasn't happy. When I'm done with this business I'm working on now, I'm going to have to try to develop something to keep me safe. I didn't bother to tell her that old Holton would insist that I trust myself and my abilities, rather than someone else's protection, no matter how sound that protection might be. Didn't seem like the thing to say at the time. Another thing I didn't bother reminding them of, this attempt might have been Brigantia's first try at getting rid of me. The most annoying thing about the Brigantia business was that, yes, I'd been angry they'd betrayed me, but despite that, I had no great urge to be revenged on them by killing the king or anyone else. The Brigantians wouldn't believe that. In fact, by old Holton's wisdom, they couldn't believe that. Which solution might be simpler? Keep a constant watch on me in case I did something? Or remove me before I had a chance to do anything? I operated mostly in Freyant, so even if I wanted to, I couldn't betray any of their spies in a rush. Nearest thing to that I could do was send a detailed letter to French authorities, but given the recent turmoil in that nation, any information I might give would be out of date. But with everything listed and added up, I was in a defensive position, only able to react to such attacks as were made. Not a very good situation, and any action I took, short of sinking Brigantia into the ocean, would only serve to prove that I was a danger to them. This part of my dance through life, no matter how many steps it took, was likely to be interesting, and I would have to dance with all my ingenuity to come through safe at the end. Lord Alder, Cad Herillion, was a tall, slender young man. He spoke with only a trace of the Eastern drawl. He declared that he had abandoned the cause of Prince Konvok to serve the rightful king, Vlad, because making one's way from Brigantia to Freyant and thence overland to Epresh was dangerous, particularly for a noble. He had taken a more circuitous route, coming through the port of Thamp in the land of Voltask. and from there overland from the northeast. Being an intelligent man, he assumed that he would be imprisoned and interrogated before any rehabilitation could take place. He further expected that his cooperation in supplying information about Prince Konbak would be vital to his rehabilitation. All this resulted in his seeming just a little too confident that he would receive forgiveness from the king, and not a news of a traitor. But then, of course, he was young. He had willingly told everything he knew, the names of every man, at least every noble, whom he knew had supported King Konbak. He was able to name most of the small contingent who had gathered around Prince Konbak in Brigantia. Very importantly, he told us that the prince was never received by the king of Brigantia. Reception would have meant some sort of tentative royal acceptance of Konbak's claim to the throne of Aprash. He was, however, the guest of Lord Dusan, well known to be close to the king, so that if and when the time were right, he could be presented to the king on short notice. I was only present for some of the later interrogations, at Balt's instigation, and shown the notes on the earlier sessions. King Ballad wishes my advice, though he will not necessarily follow that advice. Should Lord Aldar be rehabilitated? I, in my turn, wish to hear your word on the matter. I'd say rehabilitate him, but keep watch on him. If he's actually come over to work for Prince Konbak from within, we'll want to know. He might even be of great use to us in such a case, whether he knows it or not. Yes, I'm tending toward that feeling myself. We'll definitely keep him watched. He might well drink the health of King Ballad and damnation to the rebel Konbak every day for years, then quietly beginning working to bring Konbak back. But I think you should notice this. He touched a finger to the paper. It's part of an effort to be seen to be telling us absolutely everything he knows, no matter how unimportant. He read, Prince Konbak is making efforts to discover the identity of the man who slipped in. The prince refers to him as that damned sneak and blew up Waldfriend. He looked at me. Your part in this has been well hidden. You received a barony from the king, though, for unspecified services to the crown. Within a short time after the Walcran incident. That could be sufficient evidence in itself. Then you demonstrated ability with a sword beyond what might be expected of some commoner. You see my point? Given the evidence and the fact that no matter what this Lord Aldar may be, there are almost certainly men here in Aprash who will be in contact with who'll be in contact with Prince Konbak. Word will get to him sooner or later. So I add another name to the list of those who would like to see me dead? He frowned. My niece is right. You need to take things you tend to take things altogether too lightly. I don't take them lightly, you know. I understand the seriousness of them all, but I refuse to let them overwhelm me. What else is there to do? Retire to some locked and barred and magically warded fortress? No, I refuse to let my enemies, or a number of them, dictate my quality of life. I've got a story for you, sir. Wilder Koratz told me. One of the servants in the house of Lord Thrantal Cad Colvern frequents one of the grog shops I go to. The other day I heard him saying as how his master was near to boiling on account of the failure of this duelist to finish you. Apparently the Lord said something along the lines of he wouldn't have had wasted his money on the man if he'd known the fellow was incompetent. Interesting, I said. Yes, Wilder said. Even more interesting is that Lord Thrantal is a crony of Lord Hargal. One wants to ask if he did it on his own or if Lord Hargal asked him to. Of course, that kind of thing is near impossible to track down, barring one or another of them speaking a careless word in the hearing of their servants, and that servant passing on the word where his master preferred he didn't. Yeah, it's been that kind of day, guys. I'm sorry. Yeah, this is what happens when it's Friday. It's Friday. Walt handed me a paper on which was a very neatly written report. Out of Freyant. Seems like the usual Frenchish fury and thunder against Outrush, home of the savage oppressors of the common people. No more about magical weapons of dreadful potency. I said. I was thinking about how the information on this sheet, so neatly written out by a secretary, represented someone's waiting in the dark alleyways for an informant who might turn out to be a band of musketeers sweating to get that little scrap of paper out by some means of communication that might well have been compromised, just so that Walt could casually set it aside as a more of the same thing out of Freyant. I wonder, Walt asked, if they've discovered that it's just too difficult to make it work properly. Or possibly someone pointed out that Callie fled here to Aprash, and the thought, perhaps constant roaring about that weapon, would encourage our own wizards to redouble their efforts. After all, they'd have heard of the Walkren. Someone down there might be able to guess what that meant. I have no illusions about their having given up the notion, I said. It's too clear a solution, if they can make it work. I wonder just how hard our own Aprash wizards are working on the matter. But it didn't seem like the thing to be curious about just now. For me, a foreigner, however much ennobled and ostensibly loyal to the Aprash crown. Callie's own work was taking much of her time, leaving her barely capable of crawling into bed at night. I asked her one night, is this project important enough for you to wear down your health? Yes, she snapped. I had possibly been able to talk her into taking a rest, but ordering her to do so was not feasible. I'd even had to take great care as to how I tried to convince her of anything. Oldham came to me one morning. Sir, I've been picking up something in the city and it smells like trouble to me. I thought I'd best let you know, see if you read it the same. Go ahead. Well, sir, it's like this. There's been a few times I've walked into a grog shop and there'll be some fellows talking. When they notice me, they'll stop. Then they'll start up talking gossip and rumors. Might be nothing, but I read it as someone getting ready to trouble us. Thanks, Olden. I trust your instincts. I have a feeling that just about everyone in the world has a grudge against me. There may be some savage. Okay, this is where I believe they're trying to use old language to describe people. Anyway, there might be some people over the new continent. Who don't, but as soon as they find out about me, they'll join in. Walden grinned. Surely it's not as bad as all that, sir. I don't hate you. Of course, you're paying me well. That cheers me immensely. I hope you recall that some of the faces that were talking in the grog shops. You might just give us a bit of a warning. Forgot all about that, sir, he said, and then a little huffily. How long do you think I've been doing this sort of thing, sir? I didn't just come in off the farm yesterday. Oh, of course not. Sorry, Alden. I think all these plots and plans and attempted murders are wearing on me a bit. Yes, you got it right, he agreed, mollified. Whether or not I had a right, it bothered me that I was letting the situation have such an effect on me. I decided it was time to work harder at practicing the dance. I'd have to take more time for it in the evenings and mornings, even if it meant delaying or putting off other business. There's a new magician working out of the Brigantian embassy, Balt said. Oh? I think the embassy was very well guarded against magical spying. He frowned. You're slipping, young Jerry. Oh, of course, I frowned myself. It was indeed a slip. I hadn't let pressure bother me that much before. If someone does a spell that has an effect on something outside of the embassy, our own magical watchers could detect it. Yes, and tell it its magical signature they're not familiar with. I see. I nodded. He went on. Whoever it was, they've been doing a little more scrying on a number of people and places, including this house and, interestingly enough, Stanrad's Cartage. They may have been trying to hide their real target in a list of places. And of course, you, a man freshly ennobled, then promoted again, would attract their attention for just for that. Even if we didn't know your history with Morgantia, we'd expect them to be looking into you. Thanks for the warning. I'd best assume that it was more than just a casual interest. Chapter 15. Okay. Jarrett came into the office 3 days later. We're being watched, sir. It seems as though they're taking it in shifts, but I keep seeing the same 4 faces. They've been out there the last 3 days. But of course, you weren't here. We went out the door just beside the window. See the little fellow over there? Gray outfit, seen better days, both him and the clothes. Bit out of place, you might say. From the style of his dress and the state of his rig, I'd say he belongs to one of the gangs. Not part of the inside ring of any gang, but one of the ragged lot who hang around the edges, hoping for a crumb. I see. He doesn't show any nerves either, for being so far out of place. No, he doesn't. I expect they picked him. I expect they picked him for the job because he seemed like he could handle it. Maybe it's a chance to work his way in closer to the center of the gang. You want me to go chase him off? I shook my head. No, don't bother. I'll go over and ask him who hired him. You don't think he'll tell you? I grinned. Oh, I'll ask him very politely. I'm sure he'll respond favorably to politeness. Jarrett grinned back. Oh, politeness. Of course. I went out and crossed the street. The little man saw me coming, but didn't act at all surprised. I revised my estimate of the situation. This was not just a watcher, but an active participant. Perhaps he had been warned sufficiently about my straightforward way of dealing with problems. I wonder who'd sent him. Bent mouth and green head were too far in the past for it to be any sort of revenge by one of their leaders. It was more likely that someone had hired one of the gang leaders to deal with me. The question was, who had done the hiring, and could I deal with that person in such a way to prevent a repetition? The little individual across the street, though seemingly inexcitable, seemed to lose just a touch of control when action was imminent. His moves, as he reached under his coat, told me as clearly as his words what was about to happen. The pistol came out and aimed at me, a little shakily, and in the same moment, I clutched my sword so it wouldn't tangle with my legs and did a forward somersault, coming to my feet just in front of him. The roll made him pull his aim down as he shot. I just totally ruined this. I'm sorry. The roll made him pull his aim down as he shot, and the shot ricocheted off the cobbles and somewhere and left to my left and behind me. Then I was standing before him. Pulling my sword. The pistol man didn't stay to fight. Just the one shot, and he was off. I, of course, was coming up behind him. In a straight race, I'd have caught him in half a dozen steps, but he dodged right and down an alley, with me close after. I heard Sherritt coming behind me. Then I understood what was happening. I stopped. A man hidden in the shadows just in front of me jumped out with a cudgel raised. I might not have noticed if I'd continued to be concentrated on the chase, as stated I should be. The shot had been meant to as much a signal to others as a serious attempt on my life. I faced the new opponent. I caught sight of two others rushing from their hiding places to further up the alley. I was supposed to have chased the first fellow until they could come at me, front and rear. But the bulking of their plan didn't seem to leave them confused at all. I brought up my sword, thrust as I dodged the cudgel. The clubman was quick too, and he twisted aside enough that my thrust, which should have gone through his stomach, only opened a cut in his abdomen. It wasn't enough to stop him, not by any means, though it might have slowed him a little bit. Any slowness was not evident. He whipped a backhand at me with his cudgel, at the same time pulling a dagger left-handed. His blade gave me the reach on his club, but if he could use dagger and club together, he could negate my advantage. Also, his friends were going to be joining within moments. Even though the alley was too narrow for more of them to come at me at once, it wasn't the best of situations. I had to dance, though. Stepping back to avoid the backhand blow of his stick, I stepped in at once to thrust low at his knee. He tried to parry it with his dagger, but he had to stoop to make the attempt. His attention was mostly on his cudgel, and he was just a little slow. His dagger clicked on my blade on the withdrawal. My next move was not legal on the dueling field. I kicked at his shin. He pulled back fast enough, and by then one of his friends was beside him. I parried the new fellow's cudgel blow, stepping forward rather than back, and brought up my knee sharply into his groin. As he fell, as he began to fall, I turned back toward the first man, who was coming back. My sword and chariots almost fouled as we both parried. I left him to share it, and went at the next in line, jumping on the man I just kneed in order to get at him. He was a little slow. Perhaps it was the sudden change from attacker to defender. His club whipped past my shoulder as I thrust him in the chest. The last man had little instant of time to be that had that little instant of time to be aware of the changed situation and seemed to manage it. Instead of trying to hit me, thus leaving himself open to my counter, he held out his club in a guard position, pulling his dagger as well. His cudgel clacked against my sword as he parried my thrust, which is actually a feint. I pivoted on my left foot, bringing my right up in a sideways snap kick with the outside edge of the foot that caught him solidly in the midsection. Though he tried hard to recover his balance, I thrust him in the chest before he could. By this time, Sherritt had dealt with the first fellow. He was poised to thrust his sword through the throat of the man I'd kneed, but I knocked his sword aside. Just a moment. It might be nice to hear which of my close friends has hired him. Listen, you, I said to the collapsed clubman. I want to know who sent you. He answered with a curse. I kicked his shin, not hard, just enough to get his attention. Not wise. Suppose I start by breaking a bone for every lie or bad answer. I might start with a leg, work my way up to the arms, hands, fingers, and so on. Do you think perhaps your chief is going to look after you until you recover? I tapped his shin once more with my booted foot. Would you like to reconsider your answer? He looked up at me through long, lank hair. I don't know who did the hiring. Chief just sent us out to set this up. I see. Who might this chief be? I work for Captain Blade. There was a touch of pride in his voice. Do you indeed? Perhaps I should pay Captain Blade a visit. Suppose you take a message to him. If he wishes to avoid my direct attention, he should let me know by tomorrow who hired him. Sherritt began to protest. I cut him off. I doubt any new attempt will be any more successful than this one. It will only annoy me very much. I don't think Captain Blade would like to annoy me. Actually, I felt he'd be adequately insulted to make at least one more try. We'd have to be on the alert. Two mornings later, I received a note at the hands of a street boy, for which I paid him a minimum. It was very brief. Someone tossed a burning bottle of oil through the window last night. No real damage. Everything taken care of. OH. A jug of oil, I thought. Not very imaginative. Definitely not as imaginative as a pistol man being used to lure me into an ambush. It also meant that some definite response on my part was necessary, and a response that required some planning. Much depended on Captain Blade's attitude. Would he go to ground and hope that I was discouraged or destroyed by his protection? Or would he carry on in his usual manner, hoping to draw me into a trap that way? I had my men hire some watchers. Not people who would take chances to find things out, but who would keep eyes and ears open and would let us know what they found out. I also connected with Alfcron, arranging a meeting at a wine shop. I still don't have anything but a near impoverished barony and an interest in a cartage company that is on the verge of moderate success. Despite that, I need some magical assistance. From me? He spread his right hand over his chest in feigned surprise. Why me? When you share a home with someone more experienced and more powerful? For several reasons, the chief two of which being she's already wearing herself out with her own work. So adding this would just make her worry about me as well. You see, you really must strive harder to amend this unpreposterous state of yours as a mere hedge wizard or mere student. I may be expected to supply my services for only a minimum or two. When I've completed my studies, I may feel that my dignity demands larger remuneration. Then he smiled. What does he require this time? A fellow calling himself Captain Blade has been hired to kill me. What I need to know is who hired him. Yes, I know that sort of thing may be difficult to uncover if Captain Blade has any capable magic warding on his meetings. If he can't manage to find out who hired him, I'd like to know any weakness in his protection, in case I decide to wish him a happy name day. Ah, yes. Do beware of vigorous response. Well, a great deal depends on the sort of magic shielding he has. I'll need at least 20 mazers for material. Suppose we say 50 mazers? Suppose we say 25. I doubt your costs are that high. Ah, and among your other talents, you are well versed in the prices of magic and its materials? Say 45. In the end, we agreed on 36, slightly more than I would have preferred. I had faith that Alcron would do his best work, though, and that his best work would be quite good indeed. A boy came by next day with a message from Alcron asking me to meet him in one of his favorite wine shops that evening, and further saying that he believed he had some positive news for me, though perhaps not everything I wanted. So I met with him that evening. After, we spent a bit of time discussing news and rumors, such as the unlikely one that Prince Kavik had hired an army of Brigantian mercenaries to win his crown for him. We got down to business. Captain Blade had managed to keep his most important meetings worded, and well worded too. He's hired one of the better hedge wizards, and serious attempts to break the words would just warn the wizard and the captain that something was happening. However, as I said, all the news is not bad. There is a spell, a very ancient one, and quite powerful, which I have just learned. I could slip you through the wards into the presence of the captain himself. However, the spell requires that you carry neither iron nor fire. He said this last as if quoting from a book, which he probably was. I should drop into the midst of Captain Blade and his men carrying no weapon? Not weaponless. I suspect that can do very well with a cudgel or stick. You might well be able to arm yourself with more fittingly. Sorry, you might be able to arm yourself more fittingly within moments of your arrival. You appear to have a very sanguine view of my abilities. You are sounding unreasonably modest. You know quite well I'm right. You might even arrive naked and unannounced in the midst of up to 10 of the sort this Captain Blade would attract, and be still standing practically unscathed when all the excitement was done. Take along a stout stick and be thankful the spell does not require to be unclothed. I considered. Old Holton had said nothing against taking chances. He did, however, deplore the recklessness of taking chances. On the balance, Alfcron was probably right. Armed with a staff, I could likely deal with up to 10 men. If I took them by surprise. What was the likelihood of Captain Blade having as many as 10 men in the immediate vicinity? 5 was a more plausible number. And I would have surprise, because they wouldn't expect me to be able to come through their wards. What's the use of wards anyway, I asked, if someone always knows a means to get through them? He smiled impudently. And there you've hit on one of the secrets of magic. There's always a constant contest between producing spells and those producing spells to counter those spells. The more modern wards are built up of bits and pieces of earlier wards, adding this trick to that to prevent the successive ward-piercing spells from succeeding. This wizard of Captain Blades, he's come up with a very serviceable set of wards, but he's missed out at least one little opening. Good enough wards ordinarily, but not when one seeking to get past the wards is more learned. More learned. He held up his head, aping intense pride, and then grinned again. So, are you willing to make the attempt? If I agree, when could you be ready? As soon as tomorrow morning. I nodded. Done. The next morning, I told Callie, I'll be out tonight and I'm not sure how late. Oh? Her face was dreadfully pale, and I wanted to tell her to take time away from her project. I knew it was no use. Whenever I'd spoken of it before, she was defensive to the point of being ferocious. The only results that could come of any cautions from me would be to have her angry as well as weary. Yes, just a little job I have to deal with. I would have explained this job, but that would have had her worrying about me as well as her project. However, it seemed I wasn't hiding things as well as I intended. She looked at me sharply, fatigue seeming to fall away, or more likely, pushed to the side. You're sounding the way you do when you speak about your past, trying to make it sound as though it were nothing important. But in reality, it was full of danger and trouble. All right, I admit there's some danger, but I'm doing my best to keep the danger minimal. By jumping in the middle of danger with an armed stick, how would you go about making the danger greater? She looked at me steadily. Jerry, Wesson, you make sure you come back safe or I'll choke the life out of you. Yes, ma'am, I said, smiling. It didn't seem like the time to point out the contradiction inherent in her threat. Sorry, that piece just had a little bit. Yeah. I met Alfcron at an inn known as the Golden Rose. As they sat over a cup of wine in the common room, he said, I think it would be best to take a private room to do the work. It's the sort of thing that would attract attention. I nodded. It would seem that would be blah. That would seem to be the best thing to do. He smiled. I'll leave it for you to arrange the room. It'll be easier for you than for an impunctuous. Don't know how to pronounce that word. The private room consisted of 4 walls, a table, a chair, and a pallet on the floor for sleeping. I rolled up the pallet to make some sort of stool out of it. Elfcron was going to be doing the work, so I left the chair, such as it was, for him. He took some things from his bag and laid them on the table. There was a small bowl, which he filled with water, a length of thread, which he cut into 3 pieces using a knife that looked as though it was made of flint. He then began braiding the 3 pieces of thread together, singing a song in a low voice. I lay a line that a man may walk. I lay a line that a man may walk, who carries with him neither iron nor fire. I lay a line that a man may walk through a place that is no place. I lay a line that a man may walk from this place to where the other waits. He continued to sing the song until he had all 3 pieces of thread braided together. Then he tied them off, laid the resultant cord on the tabletop. The line is laid. Strain was beginning to show on his pale face. On the table now was a spot of silver, 2 breadths wide, and the line of silver led from it to the wall. As he was doing the working, I had shed my sword and gone through my clothing to rid myself of any metal I might have. I took off my boots, since the heels put on with iron nails. After that, I took up the staff. Get up on the table in that silver pot and follow the line. Pay no attention to anything you might see, and whatever you do, do not step off the line. Yes, I know. He gave me a sharp look, but there was no time to explain to them that I'd done this once before, or that Callie's spell had allowed me to carry the sword. I got up on the table, which creaked alarmingly, and started along the path. I was glad that I'd done this before. The last time, I'd Callie behind me, warning me to ignore various things and tried to distract me, but this time it was up to me. Nor were the things I saw this time the same things that I saw last time, though there were some similarities. A large eagle circled above me. There was a maiden beside the path, weeping and seeking a champion to defend her. An old man on a throne just off the path. Whoops. Throne just off. And he had such knowledge would render all my problems and difficulties as nothing. A unicorn, fair and white, trotted back and forth across the silver line, looking back to urge me to follow her. All these things, and many other things, caught my attention, but through and past them all, I kept going. At last there was a silver spot, and when I stepped on it, I was in a room with 6 other people in it. I made good use of their momentary surprise, thrusting myself into the small as the back of the man ahead and to the right of me, then spun left and smacked it across the temple of a man facing me, took a step and whirled my back against the wall, but far enough away from it to have room to move. Now they were beginning to move in their turn, clubs coming up and knives coming out. A quick step forward, and I hit a knife man across the throat. I parried a club with a circular motion of the staff and brought up the butt of the staff in his groin. Wood clacked on the wood as I parried to the left again, then kicked a shin. Whirl, step, parry, strike, kick, always moving, never losing track of who was there and who was still mobile. I also, as much as possible, leaving Captain Blade to last. He was easy to pick out, being better dressed than any of the others, and the only one carrying a sword. He didn't leave all the fighting to his men either. I parried his sword several times, countering with the staff, but not quite connecting. Then I put the last knife man down and turned to Captain Blade. A commoner doesn't usually get much opportunity to become proficient with a sword, unless he happens to go into the cavalry, and even then, the use of a sword from horseback is much different than using it on foot. Captain Blade knew his business. He was good with the sword, though not quite excellent, and he never tried for any flashy moves. He was also quick, which rendered his good swordsmanship that much better. I got to be quite good at sections of the dance that involved stick work or staff. That involved stick work or staff work, though. And in the end, I got through his guard to wrap his elbow. The sword flew from his hand. He went for a knife, but he wasn't so quick with his left hand, and I sent the knife flying before he could get into position. He stopped then and smiled at me. So you must be the accomplished Baron Jordan Cadiflin. At least it makes a very good man to get me, not some sneaky little fellow coming at me from the blind side with a knife and a grudge. I didn't stop being wary. I congratulate you too, Captain Blade, but I don't have time for conversation. I'd like very much to know who hired you to push me. He shook his head. Wouldn't do me much good to become known as a talker. It might be better to be a live talker than dead with your character intact. I'd wager it was a noble who hired you, though. How much do you really owe to any noble? I knew I was just talking. I didn't see any likelihood in making him talk, not with the amount of time I had. Threats or broken bones wouldn't do much. He continued to smile. No, I think my best revenge is to not say anything. You'll spend a lot of time looking over your shoulder, wondering just who might or might not have to be hired in my place. I smiled back. Well, perhaps I'll just have to pay my respects to Lord Hargle. It was a little more than a shot in the dark, but it seemed to hit a mark. His flinch might not have otherwise been noticeable, but my awareness, heightened by the dance, caught something. Not enough evidence for conviction in any court, of course, but enough for me. Goodbye, Captain, I said. I struck him sharply on the temple with the staff. Leaving him alive behind me would be foolish, and I had neither the time nor the desire to draw things out. A fast death for him suited me just as well. I found one of the 6 who had shoes that fit me. They were rather worn, but even worn shoes were much better than going through the streets wearing nothing but socks on my feet. Going down through the common room didn't seem wise to me, so I took several coats, knotted them together, sleeve by sleeve, and went down through the window. Getting back to the room where I'd left Alfcron was easy after that. You managed then? Alfcron was drumming his fingers on the table. I managed. I didn't get any sort of complete confession, but I believe it's Lord Hargle. I see. Will you be wishing him a happy name day then? I pulled my boots on. I want to think about just what sort of action I'll take. It might be best to concoct some evidence to take to the king, showing that to Lord Hargle, showing that Lord Hargle was plotting against me. Just what sort of action would constitute Lord Hargle not living quietly on his estates, particularly in view of the fact that the king did not care much for me. As for taking some time off to deal with him personally, yes, it might come to that. I bade Elfcron a good night and went home. I'd taken to having two of the four staying at the house to keep a surreptitious watch overnight. This proved to have been a wise measure on the fourth night after I'd dealt with Captain Blade. There was a tap on the bedroom door, which brought me awake. Callie did not stir. She was lying on her side with her face to me, in a much more relaxed in sleep than awake. I went to the door. Who is it? Holden, sir. There's some goings on out front. Just a minute. I went back and got into a shirt and trousers, belted on my sword, and took a brace of loaded pistols and tucked them into my sword belt. I'd taken to secreting loaded pistols at several places around the house. That had required special words with the servants, particularly those responsible for cleaning and dusting. Welt's home ought to be safe from invasion, but neither old Holton nor I would ought to, for certainty. I closed the bedroom door. With any luck, we could take care of this without disturbing Callie. What is it, Holden? Some people are gathering outside, sir, coming in twos and threes from various directions. I nodded. A group of men in one spot coming through the streets together would attract attention, even at this hour of night. So naturally, they'd split up and go by different routes, gathering here. Arms? I've seen clubs and daggers, sir. There's likely some pistols out there too, but I haven't seen any. Right. We went down to the front room on the ground floor. The windows were closed and shuttered for the night, but there were small holes set here and there to allow one to look out. I could see the figures, about 10 of them now, mostly standing in the shadows of trees and bushes. We are under attack? Walt was standing behind us, dressed as much as I was, save for lacking a sword. I believe so. There are some people gathering out there, and I have every expectation they'll attack. Would you like to get a couple of pistols and make ready? It was his house, so I told him about it before I set the pistols up. I wasn't about to suggest that he hide while we took care of an attack on his house. Besides, with these odds, 2 more pistols might be very helpful. They're coming, Olden called. The window! Something hit the shutters, hard, then hit again and again. The shutters, sturdy as they were, cracked and gave way at last, and the window was smashed inward. Another moment later, men were leaping through the hole. It appeared they'd used a ladder for a battering ram, and once they made their opening, they dropped it so the upper end lay across the sill, then ran up the ramp. It created. I pulled my 2 pistols and fired at the men who were silhouetted against the vague light from outside. One of them went down. which was not bad for this sort of shooting. Holden and I stepped in to the attack. For a few instants, we'd have a bit of advantage until they could get enough people inside. Furthermore, every man we put down now was one less to overwhelm us later. Another pistol blazed. Vault had gotten to at least one of my cache of pistols. At the time Vault fired, I was busy with a competent swordsman, but I did notice that one of the men coming in through the window clasped to the floor. Our swords rang together with parry, thrust, feint, thrust, and parry. He tried to kick at my shin, but I'd been trained not only to do such things, but to watch out for them from others. Thrust, feint, parry, thrust again, and this time I hit home. I was just quick enough to pulling back to avoid a man with a club, who wasn't quite quick enough to dodge my return thrust. The pistol blazed from the window this time, but the ball went nowhere near me. A fellow with a dagger jumped at me, and my eyes still dazed from the pistol flash. I nearly missed him. I just managed to catch his dagger wrist with my left hand and redirect the path of his stab, sending him staggering halfway across the room. There was no time to worry about him now. There were still men coming in the window. I discovered I had worked my way over to where the drapes hung. Grabbing a fistful, I slashed with my sword to get myself a fair length of heavy cloth. I whipped the tail of it across the eyes of a swordman coming at me, then thrust him in the throat. Wrapping the cloth around my left arm in a quick circular motion, I caught a dagger in it. Then thrust at the dagger man's chest. Another pistol banged, but by now it was impossible to say who it might have been in such close quarters. The dance had full control of me now, as I moved here and there, slipping past attacks and making attacks of my own. And then there was the last three of them were scrambling out the window. Then the last three of them were scrambling out the window, while I stood quietly watching. It was too soon to relax. Some of the people lying on the floor were only wounded, and a wounded man can kill you as dead as a hail man. Vault spoke from a corner. Just a moment. I have rung for one of the servants to bring a light. It will take a while at this hour. I moved around looking for Olden. My eyes were becoming accustomed to the poor light, but it still took some time to distinguish who was who. I just barely found him when a door opened and someone in a white nightshirt stood there holding a candle, blinking at the carnage. Ah, good, Vault said. Give us some light here. Please, Everett. Something smashed the front door. I whirled, my sword coming up. I caught a glimpse of a heavy-set, shaggy, bow-legged form in the doorway, stepping through the wreckage of the door, moving fast. Though it went with a bow-legged waddle, it traveled faster than it ought to, and headed directly for the stairs and up. Callie! I leaped to follow it. I was halfway up the stairs when I heard another smash from the upper hallway. Whatever it was quick. I was 3/4 of the way up the stairs when I saw it at the head of the stairs. Coming down, Callie hanging limply under its huge arm. As it came closer, I smelled a rank animal scent, and it reminded me of the Meshitic ones. This thing, however, had longer hair and seemed to be a golden color in the bare light. I thrust with my sword. The thing batted it almost carelessly, then swung a backhand at me. It was appallingly quick, though I managed to dodge much of the force of the blow. It was still enough to send me staggering against the banister, then rebounding. Slightly stunned from the blow, a little more dazed from hitting the banister, I was not quite able to control my fall properly. I can, under ordinary circumstances, under ordinary conditions, roll down a stairway with only a few bruises. This was not ordinary conditions. In my slightly dazed state, I didn't quite manage to protect my head properly. Somewhere along the way, it rapped on something. Stair tread or banister, and I lost consciousness. I woke to disorientation. I was lying on a bed, not my own, and there were several people in the room, most of whom I didn't recognize. Some of those I did recognize, I knew only from having them pointed out to me, and I couldn't recall their names. Olden was there, his arm in his sling, his right arm in his sling, a bandage around his head, glaring grimly at me. He was supposed to protect me, and I'd gotten hurt. The mere fact he was wounded and unconscious himself when I got hurt had no bearing on the case. Vault was also there, apparently unhurt. Thank the God who watches the world. There were several others, talking in low tones, and now I recognized Moulton, one of the royal sorcerers. Yes, indeed, the whole thing would be enough to require the consultations of the highest level. The fact that I'd been attacked was possibly a side issue. The fact that I'd been attacked in the home of Vault Cad Tarnhend, one of the advisors to the king. I tried to speak, and it came out as a wordless croak. There was silence for a moment, and everyone turned their eyes on me. A man dressed in dark clothing, with a receding hairline and a dapper, pointed beard, bent over to offer me a cup of well-watered wine. I took it and looked around. Callie? She's been taken. Vault was grim. Taken where? He shook his head. Moulton has just attempted to scry her whereabouts with no success. She's apparently hidden from scrying. He's been resting for a bit before he tries his next effort. Apparently the thing that took Callie reeks of magic, and it ought to be possible to trace where it went. My head was aching, and I couldn't think properly, but I wished Alfcron was here. Though I realized that Moulton was better trained and more knowledgeable. Though I realized that Moulton was better trained and more knowledgeable, I knew Alfcron was better. I began pulling myself up into a sitting position. The dapper healer put a hand on my chest, saying, "Best be still for a bit. You've taken a few solid blows to the head." I looked down at his hand, then up at his face. Someone's just taken my wife. I think her situation is more serious than mine. He smiled, affecting not to notice the threat I was attempting to put into my gaze. Ah, the young, such determination. I will not waste my breath warning you to be a little careful about yourself. Having passed on the warning, he said he wouldn't bother with. He took away his hand. I took a place beside Moulton as he followed the bright spark on a twisted trail until it disappeared. He muttered a few phrases I didn't catch. Then suddenly a building appeared. We all looked at it, trying to identify it in the gloom. "Ha!" Balt exclaimed. "The Burgundian embassy." All eyes turned toward me. "Yes, it was probably aimed at me. I wondered why they didn't send that thing to kill me." Moulton spoke up. "They had to get through the wards here. The thing is, that thing, whatever it was, seems to have the ability to ignore magic. At least magic as is known here. I am theorizing, you understand, but I believe they had to bargain with something or someone for the use of that thing. And the price of a death was too high for them to afford." I nodded. A move that sent a flare of pain through my head. "I see. So shortly, I assume, I will be receiving an invitation to come to the Burgundian embassy to recover something of value to me. And they will either kill me there or send me to Burgundia to be dealt with there." "They would risk a war?" "What risk? The only evidence we have is what Moulton has shown us. And even with all of us to swear to it, it's just that, our word. And by morning, Callie will be moved to somewhere else, somewhere equally well worded. If they actually do release her when I return myself in, they will see to it she can identify or recognize only one or two local hirelings, with no link to the embassy at all." You don't mean to turn yourself over to them? Paul demanded. Actually, I was intending to do something a little different, and perhaps something they won't expect. But I need to make some preparations. Paul, will you help me? You're putting my niece at risk. No more than she is now. You understand the most sure way for them to prevent any connection between Brigantia and her abduction is to see that she never returns, whether or not I put myself in their power. His face went grave, but he was familiar enough with political necessities to understand. More to his credit, he understood, despite the fact that it was his niece's life that was being hazarded. Then all I can ask is that you do your best. That I can promise, I replied. I lifted the knocker on the door of the Brigantian embassy, rapped it twice on its brass knocking plate, and waited. As I waited, I put aside all the little aches and pains from the morning's endeavor. I brought into play the parts of the dance that quiet the mind and concentrate the attention on what must be done. A short time later, the door was opened by a man in servant's dress. He was well built, broad shoulders, and his hairline was receding. I caught a glimpse of small scars on his knuckles, the marks of a man who had been used to settling disputes with his fists. I was not likely to be fighting him today, but this is a useful thing to be aware of. Yes, sir, may I help you? Quite possibly. I am Jordan Wesson, Baron Cad Dyflum. I'm led to understand that someone here knows the whereabouts of something very important to me. Indeed, sir. And do you have a name of this person? If I had, I should have mentioned it. Would you be so good as to take my message in? Certainly, sir. Please step inside and wait. The waiting room was mostly in shades of brown, from a dark brown wooden table to the wooden paneling that shaded down to something almost yellow. I took a chair and sat. It gave me a little touch of comfort to know that very shortly there would be intense excitement, perhaps even concern, deep within the embassy. Here I was, coming in as if in accordance with their plan, but they would know that they hadn't sent any message to me as yet. If I guessed their intent thus far, what preparations had I made? Just how should they look upon my arrival? It was clearly a stratagem. What sort of stratagem? They would know my reputation too, and would be duly wary. The servant came back in, with nothing given away in his expression. In fact, he probably had nothing to give, save the message with which he had been sent. If you'll come this way, Mr. Hillis will deal with your query. Certainly. The inner room to which he led me was more gold than brown, dominated by a large wooden desk with a chair behind it. Finely shaped brass oil lamps stood on stands here and there on the walls, bringing light to all the room. Mr. Hillis was a lightly built man of about my size, wearing a close-fitting but not tight military uniform, green jacket, white trousers, epaulets, and some 6 feet of braid altogether. He also wore the Order of the Island Star across his chest, an order not given away to just any aristocratic young man with a powerful family. I suspected he was serving a similar purpose to the one I had served, the collection of intelligence, and it was given and Even possible he is well trained as I. Have a seat, Lord Dyflum. No, very well, if you insist. Now, you say you have someone here that has something of yours? How did you come to that conclusion? Was there a message? Not as much, but something very dear to me was removed this morning, and I have it on good authority that was brought here. He lifted his brows. You're accusing one of the embassy staff of theft? Not theft, really. It's more a case of kidnapping and holding for ransom. The ransom was for me to present myself here, so here I am. His face took on a baffled expression, which I would wager was no more than two-thirds of the summon was two-thirds feigned. It certainly covered a lot of cautious thought. Here I was coming as a result of a summons they had not yet sent. What was behind this? What was I attempting? Should he carry on according to the prior plan? One moment, please. You must admit this is a rather unusual situation you are suggesting. I must consult with my colleagues. He stood and went out. I sat quietly, waiting. I was very sure there were several spy holes in the walls and that I was being watched. I concentrated on keeping the aches and pains at bay. At some time this morning, I was likely to have to move, and move as if I were in perfect condition. I also maintained a calm expression, taking in my surroundings, but not obviously staring in any of the places in the walls where spy holes might be. Their presence or location was not likely to be of much importance to me, but still, it was knowledge. Finally, Mr. Hillis returned, and there was now an air of decisiveness with him. A decision had been taken. Baron Cad Dyflin, it does appear that someone here has knowledge of the whereabouts of your wife. We would like to ask you a favor in return for the information. And what kind of favor might that be? Your return to Brigantia is required. Just that, no false promises of safety. At least they were not quite that duplicitous. I see. But all I have here is your word that you will know the whereabouts of my wife. I must insist that I see her first. His expression remained unchanged. This was clearly something they had expected. Of course. He rang a small bell on his desk. Very shortly. So shortly that it's clear he'd been waiting for the summons. Another man came in. He was heavy built, running to paunch, clean shaven with stubby fingers. He wore a plain brown coat with buff trousers, and he carried a silver bowl and silver flask. Hillis introduced him. This is one of our wizards, Mr. Tolson. He is about to demonstrate something to you. Mr. Tolson set the bowl down on the desk, then poured water into it from the flask. When it was full, he passed his hand over it in a smoothing motion. About a foot above the surface, a figure came. At the same time, about a foot above the surface. At the same time, he spoke a few words. Come here and look, he said. I rose and walked to the table and looked at the surface of the water in the bowl. A tall tower built of trimmed and fitted blue-gray stone stood on a rugged landscape against a sky of dark and threatening clouds. Mr. Tolson moved his hand above the waster once more, and now the view was inside the tower. Dark blue-gray stone walls with ceramic oil lamps burning, and on a large brass bed lay Callie, asleep or unconscious. I looked at Mr. Tolson. A fine set of pictures, I said, and I'm sure that anyone confident enough in illusion can provide the same. I'm expected to take this as proof that she is alive. I'm afraid I will require a bit more. I need to see her at first hand. Mr. Tolson's expression was suddenly triumphant. And so you shall, he said. Then he said what sounded like a name I didn't quite catch. Just as I was realizing that I'd cleverly maneuvered myself into a trap when the floor seemed to fall away from beneath me. For a moment, I was in chaos again. Then I was in the dark stone room, and Callie was still lying on the bed across the room. I had a feeling that when I demanded to see her firsthand, the demand had permitted Towson to complete the spell. The first thing I had to do was check on Callie. I stepped forward. Now what have we here? Inquired a voice from behind and to the left. I was sure there had been no one but myself and Callie in the room when I had arrived. I half turned and saw the beast watching me. I still thought of it as the beast, though I could see intelligence in the eyes, and it was speaking to me. I reached for my sword. No, no, let's not fight. At least not yet. The lion-like jaw was not suited to form human words, but I heard it with no trace of accent or mispronunciation. It was hardly a surprise to realize that there was magic at work. Come, let go of your sword for a moment. I must tell you a tale of sly and clever bargains made, please. If the need for fighting should come, I promise you sufficient time to arm yourself. Remembering how dreadfully quick it had moved before, I released my sword, though reluctantly. If we were talking, it might just be possible for me to take it by surprise. What might your name be? I asked. My name. Well, one for better designation, you might call me Carnovas, an epithet which has no power over me. And I already know who you are. That greasy little wizard attempted to hire me to kill you, but balked at the price I named. However, he did agree to the price for taking your wife and holding her safe until called for. But here, you see, he attempted to make a bargain that would have pushed me into fulfilling his first request. He sent me to your home expecting that you would attempt to stop me and thus force me to kill you. And you will recall that came very near to occurring. Since the effort did not succeed, he has now sent you here in an attempt to rescue your wife and again place me in a position of having to kill you. All this strikes me as being sufficiently bad faith to negate the bargain. It also strikes me as being good and sufficient reason for me to teach him a lesson. Would you not agree that I have a case against him? This is all so close to being out of one of the old tales of bargains with spirits and beings of power, bargains which usually turned around and bit the bargainer. So I spent a moment trying to make sure that whatever I said, I made no promises of my own. I would say so, I said cautiously. Aha! And you don't quite trust me, do you? You believe that I'm seeking some sort of hold over you. And if you begin making great protestations of how much you trust me, I will know you lie. I heard laughter in his voice and wondered if this was actually the grim and deadly guardian I'd expected. But then I remembered he could be quite grim and deadly when he chose to. Suppose, he said, tilting the great lion-like head to one side as he looked at me. Suppose I give you a chance to ask a favor of me. What would you do then? What sort of chance would you give? I will not, for instance, wrestle you 2 falls out of 3. Carnovas laughed again. Haha, good humor still lives. And you are careful with your words, not putting anything in the form of a possible offer, for someone might well take an earnest in your words you spoke in jest. No, I had not thought of wrestling, but of matching skills in another way. I believe you are an adept of the dance of the 100,000 steps. I have some training in that regard. I managed to show no surprise that this strange being from far across chaos from my home should know of the dance. Yes, I thought as much. Suppose we shall map skills together? No, I do not suggest we use our skills against one another. I think that would be no fair contest. But I suppose we were to stand side by side and go through the dance so far as each of us knows it. The first to falter or stop would be the loser. It did seem a reasonable notion. I did know the dance very well. This would not require me to match skill unequally either. All it required was a familiarity with the dance. So we stood side by side and began the dance. Much of the beginning sections consisted of movements forward and back, simple blocks and attacks with the hands. Then there were more complex steps, more complex sets of blocks and attacks. These were interspersed with the various meditations, the methods of harnessing power of the mind to calm oneself, to control breathing, heartbeat, and so on, and even, if one were sufficiently skilled, the speed of healing the body. The moves grew more complex, systems for fighting 2, 3, or more people, people armed with this weapon and that, and so on and so on. We came to what I'd always regarded as the end, and Carnovus kept on going. For a while, by keeping my eye on him, I was able to carry on. But then the time came when the movements brought me to a position with my body turned away from him, and I could not guess at the next move, nor could I crane my neck over the shoulder. I stopped. I had lost. He finally stopped as well and looked at me. Ah, so you do not know the dance completely? No, I admitted. I only know what I know. I suppose that no one, I suppose one never knows it completely until one has taken the 100,000th step. Ah, he chuckled. So there's a little wisdom there as well. Too little, it seems, or I never would have taken the challenge. There is humor in his voice. Yes, and at this point, I am supposed to send you away and keep your wife here. But I wish to be revenged upon. I wish to be revenged on the greasy little wizard. Suppose I were to release your wife in turn for 2 favors. It would depend on the favors, I said cautiously. I will not promise you the life of my wife or anyone I hold dear. Suppose one of the favors is to bring me the wizard. That I could do. Suppose, furthermore, that we leave the other favor to be asked and granted sometime in the future, with a stipulation in place that you will not offer the lives of anyone you hold dear. Suppose we make it that I will not harm anyone that I hold dear. Aha, you shift the bargain then? You will recall I have not agreed to the bargain. I am simply making the terms of the bargain more precise. Carnovus chuckled. Perhaps a little more wisdom then. On my part, I agree. And for you? I agree. Good. Now go fetch me the wizard. Suddenly I flicked back into chaos, and through and out again, standing in front of the wooden desk, where just before I had looked into the wizard's scrying bowl. No one was in the room, and the lamps were presently unlit. Well, the first thing was to find the wizard Tolson. I went to the door from which the wizard had entered the room. It led to a short hallway, deserted. Well, someone somewhere had certainly been made aware of my penetrating the embassy wards. Tolson himself might even come to deal with the intruder. Standing there and waiting for him to find me seemed like a little too passive for my taste, though. All the doors in the hallway were closed, so I picked one at random and opened it. It was unlocked and uninhabited, and seemed to be used as a storeroom for old books. I went out to the next door. It was also unlocked, but inside it was a clerk at a plain dark table, busily transcribing something. Excuse me. He looked up at me, his expression blank. As a clerk, there'd be much that would be as much as a greeting as he gave anyone. Perhaps unless perhaps they ranked below him. I was told I'd find the wizard Halston here. Clearly I've been misinformed. Where is he? I spoke in the manner of one accustomed to having his questions answered immediately and precisely, particularly by low clerks. Mr. Tolson, sir? He blinked. I'm afraid I have no idea. Which was no more than I'd expected. He probably knew more. But it was knowledge that he wasn't supposed to have, so there was no point in his confessing it when it might get back to people who would object to him knowing or telling such things. So where would I find someone who would know? I demanded. If you go back out and 2 doors down to your left, someone there ought to be able to help you. I certainly hope so, I said, continuing to play my part. I went out to the suggested room, opened the door, and stepped in. There were 3 clerks there. 2 of them apparently involved with some sort of bookkeeping ledgers, and the third one in conversation with Mr. Hillis. There would be no artifice here. I drew my sword in hoping to forestall Mr. Hillis from doing anything drastic. I was 2 steps away from him, however, which was one step too many when dealing with such people as Hillis or myself. With one hand, he flicked a chair across my path, stepping back quickly to get his own sword free. I took a quick check step to allow the chair to go skittering past. Our swords engaged with a climbing of metal on metal. After a few quick passes, I knew he was a very good swordsman. 3 clerks stayed still, none of them feeling a need to interfere with the 2 men were having at each other with bare steel. Mind you, they ought to have been scrambling to summon help, but I wasn't about to complain about their lack of initiative. I kicked at Hillis's shin, but he'd learned that one too and pulled back fast. I gave ground as though being forced back, then forced a foot to hook the loose chair he flung my way and send it back at him. It was a dangerous maneuver, and I barely parried his thrust as I was doing so. But in making that thrust, he momentarily lost track of what I was doing. Where he sent the chair across my path, I sent it very nearly straight at him. At that time, I heard the door open behind me, but it was imperative to deal with Hillis first. He checked, but not quite enough, and stumbled a bit as the chair caught him across the shins. I made a thrust of my own. He got his left hand up enough to partly deflect it, but the deflection wasn't sufficient. My thrust took him in the chest, and he went back and down. I whirled toward the open door to face 2 more swordsmen. They were embassy guards, competent but not exceptional, and they'd probably been alerted by the wizard who felt my coming through the wards. I got one of them through the upper arm in the first pass, and he tried to toss the blade from right hand to left. He bungled the catch, but I was already turning to deal with the second man, as the loose sword clattered across the table, causing a clerk to flinch violently and upset his chair. I got the second man with a quick kick at the knee, then a thrust in the chest. I went back to the first, who was scrambling around the table, trailing a cloud of trailing blood as he went. I put a hand on the table and bolted across, and thus was able to catch him just as he stooped over to recover his weapon. I touched my point to the back of his neck. Leave it lie and straighten up slowly. He straightened up, and I shifted my position to be able to watch the whole room and door as well, just in case one of the clerks were suddenly inclined to play the hero. Now, I need to know where Mr. Tolson is. I'm sure you understand by now how serious I am. For you to be stubborn will simply annoy me. I looked around at the clerks. Who here is willing to die for the sake of a fat little wizard? They looked back at me numbly. I took just enough of a step forward to put the point of my sword at the throat of the spindly young man. Upstairs, he said quickly. Third door, along on the left. I stepped back. My thanks to you. I'd suggest that none of you leave this room for the next half hour. I wasn't sure if that would hold him, but I wasn't inclined to mass murder either. And of course, in the manner worthy of fantasy, the door opened and Mr. Tolson stood there. It seemed reasonable that a wizard would come to investigate the breaching of the embassy wards, very likely one of the best wizards available. Mr. Tolson, however, was not as imposing as a wizard from a fantasy. He had clearly been called away from his meal, for there were breadcrumbs on his coat, along with a thumb-sized stain of spilled soup. Imposing or not, I had good reason to respect his abilities. I leaped forward as he was taking in the scene, and I hit him across the chin with the guard of my sword. As he collapsed, I grabbed at his collar. Now, how in the world was I, with no magic of my own, supposed to get him to Carnovus? I was at a loss. Carnovus? I said, feeling foolish as I spoke to the air. I've got him. What now? There was a pause, enough time, it seemed, for me to have counted it leisurely 5, enough time for a wounded guard to begin scrambling for a sword. The floor dropped out from under me, and I was in chaos. Then I was out of chaos, in the stone tower, and Carnovus was watching as the sudden solid floor underneath me, combined with Mr. Tolson's weight on my arm, pulled me down, sprawling. The lion-like face couldn't smile, but I heard his laughter. Very prompt, young man, very prompt. But of course, you are inclined to quick action, aren't you? Are you not? He made a brief motion with one hand, and suddenly there was a cage of woven willows tied at the top with a golden knot, and Mr. Tolson lay inside it. The withes did not look strong enough to hold anything more vigorous than a healthy rabbit, but of course, magic would be involved. There would be magic involved. Now, Carnovus said, you may take your wife, but remember the rest of our bargain. Yes, another favor to be claimed sometime in the future. I stepped over to the bed. Callie seemed to sleep through everything, and I wondered if there was something I could do, if I were to do something as silly as kiss her to wake her up. I touched her arm. Her eyes flew open. Jerry, I've had such a dream. Then she took in the surroundings. It wasn't altogether a dream, was it? No, but I've come to take you back home. And I suddenly realized again that I have no way of crossing chaos. Carnovus spoke up. No need to ask another favor of me. Your wife could take you home, of course, but I'll send you. In the instant while the floor dropped out from under us, I wondered whether this gift was going to put me in debt with Carnovus even further. He seemed to have declared it would not, but we were back in the Burgundian embassy, in the office of the late Mr. Hillis. It was still unoccupied, though I knew it wouldn't remain so for long, considering the great to-do that must have been caused by the abduction of Mr. Towson. I looked at Callie, still in her nightdress, and pulled off my coat to wrap it around her. Pulled my coat off to wrap it around her shoulders. He appears to have every broad notion of sending us home. He appears to have a very broad notion of what sending us home means. Where are we? The Burgundian embassy. The whole tale is a bit long, and I think our first order of business would be to remove ourselves from here as rapidly as possible. I opened the door and looked into the foyer. It was empty. Were we going to be so lucky? Come on, I said, starting out the door. It appeared we were not to be that lucky. Another door opened, and out stepped a guard, armed with a pistol, followed by another man, possibly a wizard. Just a moment, said the guard. Before you attempt to stop us, I should show you something. I reached into my waistband and pulled out a small marble sphere, one of the preparations I had made with Vault so long ago this morning. I spoke the arming word and tossed it on the floor at his feet. It took him just enough off balance that he didn't fire quickly enough. The wizard, if that's what he was, didn't do anything either, such as turning into a newt. The sphere burst into a cloud of smoke, spreading swiftly through the room. This one had no smell to it, though it did put a tinge of panic. Before the cloud reached us, I'd pulled the door open and began hustling Collie out. I heard the pistol fire inside and heard the ball hit the wall somewhere, probably near where I'd been when the smoke went up. Quickly, I said. I have no idea how far they may chase us. Okay. Okay. Quick moment here. I'm finding out just how long I can do this for. Because why? Because everything is about to die. I have low battery on everything. So, give me one moment here while I... Uh-oh. Well, hopefully I pressed the wrong button on Twitch, so hopefully you're still there, Twitch. I'm really sorry. Okay, now for YouTube. I'll be right back. Just give me one moment here. Guys, thank you for your patience with me. I just had to grab for the... Well, and at least now I know. Now I know that if I'm going to do this much reading, I need to make sure everything's plugged in ahead of time. And it's not like I can just turn you guys off and then turn you back on, although I guess I can. But not really. So thanks everybody for being patient with me. And really, honestly, let's see here. We have, before I continue on, but let's see how much we have left. Okay, yeah, I got 8 pages left. We can do this, guys. Thanks for being troopers here. I think we're all, yeah. Anyway, well, let's continue on. I'm almost out of drink too. And my voice is sounding very rough. I should not have had the milk. It should have just been all tea. Okay, here we go. Chapter 17. As it happened, no one chased us. Getting through the vestibule would be a chore For the present, the smoke cleared, and a touch of panic. Considering my previous depredations, how many competent people would be available to chase us any longer? Even before that, though, I became aware that Callie was still barefoot, and the cobbles were hard. Worse still, it was now dull day, and even with my coat pulled close about her, her state of dress, or rather undress, was clear. People were beginning to stare. Farmers were going by in carts and on foot, carrying produce to the market. I hailed one of them, but he gave me a look that said about how scandalized he was with the doings of young lords and their fancy ladies. I seized the horse's bridle and brought him to stop over the shouts and snapping whip of the driver. He was scandalized and he was angry. It would not take much for him to overcome his reluctance to lay a whip to somebody who appeared to be a young lord. The horse began stamping and tossing his head, confused by the man holding his bridle, combined with the driver shouting and snapping his whip. I let go the bridle, turned, and vaulted into the cart, landing beside the surprised driver. I snatched the whip out of his hand and dumped him on the ground. I hauled the horse to a halt, then tossed a handful of coins, mazers and minims and all. "Go buy yourself another cart," I shouted. Then I turned to Callie. "Callie, come up." I grabbed the arm she held out and hauled her up beside me, then set the horse to moving. I looked back to see the driver scrambling for the coins, competing for them with several street boys and an old woman. Making our escape on a cart filled with turnips isn't precisely romantic, but at least it's better than walking. She smiled at me. Much better. That's awkward. I let Callie out of the cart in front of the house. Despite what I'd said to the farmer, I was going to have to make some effort to get his cart back to him. Vault met us at the front door, which was still under repair. "Would you be interested in learning what we found out about the group of ruffians who attacked us in the night?" I looked at him. "From your expression, I gather they weren't hired by the Brigantians?" "No, it was a coincidence they came so nearly together. With a little magical effort, we were able to trace them to someone who hired them on behalf of a certain lord. It appears that this lord has or had connections with Prince Konvuk. Nothing can be taken as proven at this time, but we're continuing to look into it." "I see. Yes, the Brigantians sent that person or beast or whatever he should be called, to abduct Callie. Brigantian wizard wanted to hire him to kill him or me, hire him to kill me, but wasn't willing to pay the price. The wizard hoped the beast, Carnovus, I suppose I should call him, would have to kill me when he took Callie. When that didn't happen, he sent me along to confront Carnovus. Carnovus considered these to be efforts to have me killed without paying the price, which negated the bargain. He allowed me to take Callie back in return for two favors. The first one was to go fetch the wizard for him, which I did. The second one is to be claimed at a later date. Yes, I know that all needs a lot of explanation, but I'm so tired that I'm going to sleep. I won't be responsible for consequences if anyone wakes me before the day after tomorrow." Ralt smiled. "Yes, of course, go rest. We can talk another time." Polly woke me suddenly, and it didn't feel like I slept much more than an hour. Sorry, it had been like much more than an hour since I lay down. On the other hand, it was dark, so I wasn't that badly off. Jerry, wake up! God of all gods, I've done it! Wake up! I hauled myself up, utilizing some of the tricks of the dance to enable myself to be capable of action. What's happened? Who's done what? The frontish. They've loosed that hell weapon I invented on the port city of Cahel, up on our boreal coast. That was enough to wake me up completely. When? How did you find out? I heard it moments ago. God of gods, the least capable shaman in his bark hut on the new continent heard it. I had to set a spell to warn me when it was about to happen. And where? But the warning was drowned out in what followed. Now we have to move, and move quickly. The one would have been in the nature That one would have been in the nature of a test, and they will want to wait and have the information passed back to say what the results will have been. We have a little time, very little time. So we destroy one of their cities first to warn them? She looked at me ferociously. Then they destroy another of ours, and so on, until every city from here to the new continent is destroyed? God of gods, I won't let it happen. You have a plan? It may have been her resolve, but it seemed to me almost natural to fall in with her plan. Stopping wholesale destruction had to be the best course. Yes, that's what I've been working on for so long. I haven't had the time to make a proper test, but I think I can make it work. One of the first things we'll need is help. Help? You know the names of some magicians close by who'd be willing to help? She shook her head. You know him better. I'm thinking of Elkron. Elkron? A student? A student with a good deal more ability than some. One whom I wouldn't have come to persuade so nearly at a pistol point to do something King Valid is surely not going to approve of. We were dressing as we spoke. I see your point. Do we call for the coach? Hardly time. I think we best go through chaos. This traveling through chaos is becoming almost commonplace. She smiled up at me again. I have brought a great number of new and frightening things into your life, haven't I? I gave her a bow. Actually, a good number of these new and frightening things were brought on by the work of people who dislike me. As I spoke, she was muttering a few words. Then the words grew louder into the rising, falling rhythm I recalled from our invasion of the Walkren. Shortly after that, there was a silver circle on the floor, and we stepped into chaos. It was easier this time than ever. None of the people, beings, or things that hoped to delay me or draw me off track had any but the least effect on me, and certainly not enough to convince me to turn aside. When we stepped into Alfcron's room, it was to face the muzzle of an ancient pistol, the sort that had a mouth like a bell, and was often charged with 6 small balls and nails. It's only ourselves, Alfcron. I'm sorry. I ought to have sent a message to say we were coming. He was wearing a large and well-worn nightshirt, which sported a good number of patches. He was quite the picture of an impunctuous student. I told myself I would have to find a way to slip him a mazzer or two. His waking bad temper was subsumed into something more approximating his usual mood. And since you arrived by such means at such an hour, and without announcement, I can assume you need me for some seriously hazardous task. If the lady will turn her back for a moment, I will dress myself while you explain. Obligingly, Callie turned her back, and then said, There is a spell which can break down matter to provide magical energy. I'm sure most of your teachers will have told you that this is a notion which has been studied by the best to no result. However, your teachers are wrong, and it has just lately been managed, and the results include the release of such power that, if not contained, it will destroy a whole city. Jerry will give you the full story later on. At present, I will only say that I hope to be able to prevent it. It is partially too late already. Calhel has been destroyed, but I may be able to stop the rest. And to do so, I need help. Will you assist me? Alfron was scowling. And clearly there's no time to talk of payment just now. If I agree, what then? The three of us will walk into chaos, and I will scry for knowledge of which cities are next to be targeted. And with any luck, I will cancel the spell before it happens. You hope to draw on Jerry's strength? She hesitated, then nodded. I may have to. I'm sorry, Jerry. I hadn't explained that to you just yet. We have so little time. I nodded. I'll help however I can. Elfcron was now dressed. So, since time is important, let us go. I was the first to step through into chaos, with Elfcron and Callie close behind. Stop, Callie said. One place in chaos is just enough like all the other places for it not to matter where we are. Elfcron, would you hold the scrying bowl? Certainly. For my own part, there was little to do but watch. I wasn't sure just how Callie distinguished which cities she was looking for. Perhaps she did not. Perhaps it was more a search for anywhere where the destructive spell was about to be aimed. I knew as well that scrying for a future event was nowhere near infallible. My fragmentary understanding seemed to say that even Callie's intent to stop the destruction might hinder her ability to see it reliably. Suddenly, the scrying bowl was aflare with lights, little pinpoints of light packed so close together by a small surface that they seemed almost one. Callie gave a brief cry of dismay, then began chanting another spell, holding on to me as she did so. I felt a tingling numbness in my left leg, which soon faded, but before us, stretched out in chaos as on a wall, was a massive flicker of pinpoints. Now, though, they could be separated, and a person knew what he might well be able to name certain cities. By mid-morning, she said. No time for any leisurely picking and choosing. Alfcron, you know the Great Anchor? It's not been taught yet, lady. Do you know it? She demanded. He smiled slightly. Yes, I do. And it seems my lady knows me altogether too well. But you realize what the risk is with this. I do. And the risk if I don't as well. What is this thing? And what sort of risk are you running, Callie? Her face was grim. It is a risk, but be assured I must take it. I can't refuse. Any more than you could refuse to offer to do favors for Carnovus. And there's no time to argue either. Alfcron, begin. So I had to accept the choice that she might take this risk, whatever it is, even if it killed her. And if I knocked her on the head and took her home, it would be to a city destroyed by the destruction wrought by the spell she developed. If we'd survived that, I'd still lose her for the fact I'd prevent her from stopping it. So I stood there and watched and wished there was something else to do. Alfcron was chanting. From time to time, Callie dropped a word into the chant. Again and again, she dropped in a word. More and more and more often, she was chanting steadily, a spell that appeared to counterpoint the one Alfcron was doing. About that time, she began to glow. First, it was very soft, then gradually it grew brighter and brighter. Her clothing changed, even her very features. She was wearing a tall white headdress set on a mass of curls, and was wearing a dress of of most awesome white. She reached out her hand toward that wall of pinpoints, and with no hesitation, touched one of them. It blinked out. She touched the next, and the next, and the next. One after another, they winked out. Nor did she concentrate her attention on Aprush. Points of light were extinguished in places that I knew had to be in Freyant, as well as some that were as far as Brigantia. Alfron stood humming to himself as this went on, and I had a feeling it was a continuation of what he had done when he started the original spell. And here I was, Jerry Wesson, the fellow who had pushed and danced his way through life, who had gotten ahead by quick wits and good physical condition, standing gawping while his wife and friend did all the work. It didn't make it any better to realize that I didn't have the ability to do a thimbleful of what they were doing. At last it was done, though. All the pinpoints were extinguished, and the map subsumed into chaos once more. Alfron was slumping where he stood, his face drawn. Callie still stood there, gleaming in her white costume, showing no signs of weariness at all. She looked at us. Best we should move ourselves out of here while we can still follow the straight line. No, Alfron, leave the bowl. It's not important. Get yourself back, though. And you too, Jerry. I went, my left leg still a little numb, but willing to answer my commands. When I stepped through, I saw that Callie had been transformed again, out of that gleaming white and at least somewhat terrifying persona. She still looked as she'd done nothing but go out for a stroll. Alfron was looking at her. Will you tell him now? She hesitated. Yes, I think I'd better. She turned to me, and her face went expressionless. Jerry, you will know the alternatives. I developed that hell spell. Then I turned it loose, hoping that the knowledge that everyone else had it would prevent anyone from using it. I discovered that I was wrong. And when it was made clear that Konvok would have turned it loose on his own country, I had, fortunately, sufficient time to work out the solution, such as it was, and just barely in time. The scope of the thing left me near helpless, though. Helpless without a good deal more power than I had, or a good deal more time than I had to train others either. This means drawing power out of chaos. It was more a theoretical notion than anything else, for there is an unavoidable cost. In my case, it means that I must spend every night hereafter in chaos. For how long? I demanded. There must be a way to change this, to turn it around, perhaps to take it for myself. Forever, Jerry. Rage swept over me, and I automatically canceled it with the dance. Old Holton always said, anger can be a good tool if you use it, but if it uses you, you're lost. Old Holton had nothing to say about what you should do when you've lost the only thing that allowed existence to be anything other than pointless drifting toward death. I couldn't be angry at Callie. She was just trying to make up for the mistake she'd made. I could be angry at Alfron for helping her, but that was hardly fair. I could even be angry at myself for not realizing that she was going to sacrifice herself. Then she smiled at me. I won't always be gone, Cherry. I can and will be with you every day. Only from nightfall until morning will I have to go back to chaos. And how many times will you go back and forth without something happening? I don't know about everything about chaos, but I do know that it's blasted dangerous. Yes, but I'm a part of it. I'm even, perhaps, one of the more dangerous things there. I really doubt that anything in chaos can harm me. I still don't like it, I declared, realizing that whether I liked it or not, there was nothing I could do about it. I stood there, gritting my teeth. Jerry, she said gently. It's morning. I looked up at her sharply, wondering what that had to do with anything. Then something opened up my mind. I smiled, though with little effort. Yes, and I'm wasting daylight with my jabbering. We best be home. Uncle Walt is going to be wondering what's happened to us, and he'll probably have a lot of questions to ask about why Cahal was the only city destroyed. She smiled back. Yes, and I hope you don't mind if we take the carriage back home. You can understand why I might not want to go tripping through chaos again just now. Alrighty. Down to the last chapter, everybody. Okay. Callie and I watched our daughter, Nalive. She was only 6 and had a good deal of grace in her movements. Part of it was natural, part of it came from the steps of the dance she had learned so far. So she had so far learned. No, the dance is not all fighting and getting ready to fight. Much of it is learning to move your body, simply and efficiently. Carnovus had yet to come and demand his favor for me. That would come in its day. And I'd almost convinced Callie not to worry about it. We'd had a good deal of discussion before the pregnancy began. There was no telling just what the effect chaos would have on an unborn child. Callie had done as many studies on the situation as she could manage. Much of the final decision was based upon the estimates of logical outcomes of this or that. We both knew that chaos was not a good place to depend on logic. The worst fear had been that the labor would come on while she was in chaos, when she would have to deal with it completely on her own. Or perhaps it might come on towards the end of the day and have her snatched back to chaos in the middle of things. Though we planned as best we could for all eventualities, the eventual event happened just after breakfast and finished 2 hours later. There doesn't seem to be any mark of chaos on her, whatever that might be, Callie said. I chuckled. You might hear a nurse argue that one when she's trying to convince the little one to go to sleep. One of the underservants approached us. Pardon, lady and sir, but the magician Elfcron wishes to speak to you. He is carrying large bundles of rolled paper, so I expect he wishes to discuss more machines with you. Send him in. I hired Elfcron eventually. There's always this or that item that needed a touch of magic, and Elfcron had done well in his studies. It seems, though, there was a grand sigh of relief at the college when he did not offer to remain there to teach. He still had very elastic notions of which spells were best left until the students had mastered basics. Having ceased to be a student, he'd gone back to his hat with the pointed crown, or rather, one newer and more expensive material. He was still dressed plainly, but the fabrics were better quality, the dyes brighter. He smiled when he saw us. Good day. I have a few little notions to put before you. Are they all like the Great Steel Road? He smiled with a bare trace of embarrassment. I would have thought that more merchants would be willing to help pay for something that would allow them to send their goods to another city with more speed and carrying capacity than horse-carried wagons. But no, these are only modifications to be made to the engines. They will be able to travel the same routes as they presently do, but with less fuel. It's unfortunate I couldn't find that smith you told me about in Svorvan. All anyone knew is that he'd fallen afoul of the revolutionary authorities. You showed the plans to Stanrad? He grunted the way he does. He still doesn't trust them. Prefers the horses he grew up with. By this time, Nellie had noticed him and came rushing over. Uncle Alfcron, do you have some more pictures to show us? She had taken to inspecting and commenting on the drawings, and and models that Elfcron supplied. And if there was any touch of chaos about her, it was that a 6-year-old should not only study such things but make sense of them and be able to discuss them cogently with her elders. Oh yes, I've brought more than that. He set down the papers and went searching through his pockets, muttering, "Where are they? I know I brought them. They're here someplace." He reached up to scratch his head in puzzlement, then his face lit up. Ah, yes! He put his hand to his ear and drew out a small bouquet of violets. I knew I had them. Here, aren't these better than any silly models? She took them. Thank you very much, she said politely. They're very nice flowers. Really, they are. But I wanted to talk to you about those gear ratios we were talking about last week. We all laughed. She whirled around, her bouquet clutched in her hand, and for a moment it looked as if she were going to burst into tears of rage. Then suddenly her face cleared. She said with determination, That's all right. You can laugh at me if you want. You've told me that children my age don't know or care about gears and machines and so on, but I don't care. When I get big, I'm going to run a railroad clear across to the new continent." "Indeed you will," Alfcron declared, "and I will make the plans, and you will show me how they work, and we will do anything we want." I looked at Callie. "They probably will, won't they? I'm a magician, not a diviner, but I'm fairly sure that whatever she wants to do, she's going to go off and dancing off and do it." Okay, I'm going to say this right now. That was the end of it. And, you know, had rough beginnings, but I kind of like where it ended off. Yeah, I have to do some restructuring, but I think what'll be interesting to do is in like once I've done the edits and stuff like that, do another reading based on what I've changed about it. But we'll see about that. It's been a very long night. I'm glad for everyone who stuck with me. Thank you for tuning in. And yeah, I will. You know what, though? I probably will talk to you guys because I'm going to go over this over the weekend and reflect on it and everything and do some pull some notes and stuff. And then probably next week while I'm editing, like actually editing, I will kind of just talk. I'll do more talk. There will not be any reading. I'll just be talking and talking about the story. So if you're interested in that, you can tune in on Monday and I'll be back with kind of a wrap up. And then, yeah, and then I'm going to do some more reading like in July. I'm just going to probably take these last little bit. Well, I might even just read. I might take off like next week or sorry, I'm actually like not even, I don't even have like my schedule thought up yet, but it's probably realistically, it's going to be July. It's going to be July. Let's just call it that. Take off 2 weeks. I know I've been doing a lot of breaks, but I'm trying to get a lot of stuff done. I'm really sorry. In an ideal world, I just do straight, like lots and lots of readings. But what I originally wanted to do with this channel is to like read for the full month. But like I wanted to get this finished because the beginning part is just so rough. And there's so much to it I want to kind of straighten out. So I'm going to have to figure it all out. There's a lot of structure stuff, and that's why I kind of wanted to read through it quickly because I wanted to just get through it and find out. I didn't want to wait for the whole entire month just to find out, okay, well, and I had a feeling that it was going to be structure. There's going to be a lot of structure. I think that's probably what's going to end up happening in future broadcasts. So what I'm going to be doing is when I'm doing like a full novel, because in July, I'm going to be just reading some short stories. They're just going to be they're going to be short, like very, very short. And That's because in August, in September, I have conventions. Well, okay, beginning of August, I don't have any conventions, but I'll be getting ready for the end of August where there's convention. Then, literally the week after that, first week of September, I have another convention, and then I'm back to like everything else. So, in saying that, I'm I have to take a break at the end of July, which for my scheduling kind of just makes it turn out like that. Anyway, now I'm just babbling because that was a lot of reading. My voice is going, so I should be going. So thank you everybody for tuning in. I'm going to talk more about this on Monday. I will see you then. Like I said, thank you everybody for tuning in. Thank you for sticking with me. Yeah, and catch a previous broadcast, listen to other stories. If you're interested in any of these things that I'm reading, check out JP Wagner. That's my dad, and those are going to be his books. My stuff is all comics and artwork that can be found on bethwagner.wordpress.com, and you can find pretty much all of our stuff together at moongatestudios.com. So thank you all for tuning in, and I will talk to you Monday.